The German officer's boots made no sound on the wooden floor. Marguerite Devereaux didn't look up from the stems she was cutting, white roses, their heads heavy with morning dew. Her scissors moved in a steady rhythm. Snip, snip, snip. Madame Devereaux. She set down the shears, looked up. The officer's uniform was immaculate, his French perfect, except for the hardness in the vowels. Hauptmann Weber, good morning. He placed a folded paper on her counter. For my colonel's dinner party, Saturday evening. Can you manage this? Marguerite unfolded the order form, read it twice. Her face showed nothing. Of course, the colonel has excellent taste. He does. Weber's eyes moved across her shop. The buckets of tulips, the hanging ferns, the small card table in the corner where she sometimes took her lunch. His gaze lingered on a vase of purple irises near the window. Those are lovely, he said. Thank you. My mother grew irises in Heidelberg. He paused. Before. Marguerite nodded once, said nothing. Weber picked up his gloves from the counter. Saturday, then, by 4 o'clock. By 4 o'clock. The door closed behind him. The bell above it gave a single bright chime. Marguerite stood very still. Then she walked to the back room, past the zinc watering cans and the spools of green wire, and pulled a small notebook from behind a loose brick in the wall. She opened it, ran her finger down a list of names, dates, and flower types. At the bottom of the page she wrote in pencil, Weber, Saturday, roses, white, 18. She tore the page out, folded it into a square no bigger than a postage stamp. That night, that small piece of paper would travel through 3 different hands before reaching a printing press in the 11th arrondissement. By dawn, 18 men would know that the senior German staff would be dining together, away from their offices, away from their files. But how does a flower order become a weapon? The problem was simple. Occupied Paris had no privacy. Every telephone line was monitored, every letter opened and read by French postal workers who reported to German intelligence. The Gestapo maintained offices on Avenue Foch, where transcripts piled up in filing cabinets, transcripts of conversations about rent, about rations, about whether Madame Beaumont's daughter would marry the butcher's son. The resistance needed to communicate, needed to move information about troop movements, supply shipments, and the schedules of high-ranking officers, needed to do this every day in plain sight without triggering the vast surveillance apparatus that had turned Paris into a city of whispers. Couriers were arrested weekly. Radio operators rarely lasted a month before the detection vans found them. Dead drops required movement, patterns, repetition, all things the Gestapo could track. So, how do you send a message when every message is being read? Marguerite Devereaux had run her flower shop on Rue Saint-Antoine since 1935. Her husband had died in the first months of the war, killed at Sedan before France surrendered. She had no children, no family beyond a sister in Lyon. She was 41 years old, thin-faced, with hands that smelled of green stems and cold water. To the Germans who occupied her neighborhood, she was exactly what she appeared to be. A woman selling flowers. They came to her shop constantly. Officers are ordering arrangements for their quarters. Enlisted men buying bouquets for French girls they were courting or coercing. The commandantur itself placed standing orders, fresh flowers for the colonel's office every Monday and Thursday. She was vetted, certainly. The Germans vetted everyone who served them. Her identity papers were checked. Her background was investigated. They found nothing suspicious because there was nothing to find. She arranged flowers. She kept her shop clean. She was polite but not friendly. She survived. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Marguerite had created something impossible. A communication system hidden inside commercial transactions that no one could prove existed. Every flower order that came through her shop contained 2 layers of information. The surface layer, the actual arrangement a customer wanted, and beneath that, encoded in the types of flowers, their colors, their quantities, a second message meant for other eyes entirely. But how do you build a code that looks like ordinary business? In occupied Paris, the Germans controlled everything through paperwork. You needed papers to buy bread, papers to work, papers to move between arrondissements after curfew. The entire city ran on permits, stamps, and official forms filled out in triplicate. The bureaucracy was suffocating, intentional. It created a paper trail for every human action. For businesses, the scrutiny was worse. The Germans requisitioned supplies, set prices, and monitored sales. Shop owners kept logbooks that could be inspected without warning. Revenue had to match inventory. Inventory had to match purchase orders. Any discrepancy meant interrogation. Marguerite's flower shop was inspected 4 times in 1941 alone. German clerks went through her order books page by page, checked her receipts against her bank deposits, counted the flowers in her cooler against the wholesaler invoices. They found nothing wrong because nothing was wrong. She ran her business exactly by the regulations. Every order was documented, every sale recorded, every transaction could be traced and verified. The genius of her system was that it required no hidden compartments, no false ledgers, no evidence that could be discovered. The code existed in plain sight, in the ordinary language of flower commerce. But the risk was total. In March 1941, the Gestapo arrested a bookshop owner in the Marais. His crime, selling books to known resistance members. They found no weapons in his shop, no hidden papers, no radio, just books sold to the wrong customers. He was sent to Frayne prison. No trial, no appeal. In June, a cafe owner near the Bastille was taken. She had allowed resistance members to meet in her back room. She claimed ignorance, said she thought they were students. The Germans shot her against the wall of her own cafe and left her body there for 3 days. The message was clear. Collaboration with the resistance meant death. Active participation meant death. Passive tolerance meant death. And if Marguerite's system was discovered, if anyone connected the flower orders to resistance operations, the Germans wouldn't just arrest her. They would trace every order backward, identify every customer, and map the entire network. Dozens of people would die, so she built her code with a single rule. It could never, ever look like code. The system began with a single observation. In August 1940, 2 months into the occupation, a German lieutenant came into Marguerite's shop and ordered flowers for a French woman he'd been seeing. He wanted roses, didn't care about color or number, just roses, something impressive. Marguerite suggested 12 red roses, traditional, romantic. The lieutenant shook his head. Make it 18. I want to show her I'm serious. She wrapped 18 red roses in brown paper and tied them with a string. The lieutenant paid, left satisfied. 3 days later, he returned. angry. The girl's father threw me out of their apartment, said 18 roses were an insult, said I was mocking his daughter. Marguerite kept her expression neutral. I apologize, sir. I should have explained. In France, even numbers are for funerals. For the living, we give odd numbers. 17 or 19, but never 18. The lieutenant stared at her. That's ridiculous. It's tradition. He left without buying anything. That night, Marguerite sat in her apartment above the shop and thought about what had happened. The lieutenant didn't know French flower customs. Neither did most Germans. They ordered flowers. The way they ordered everything, bluntly, by quantity and type, without understanding the social language beneath, and that language was complex. Roses meant love, but yellow roses meant jealousy. White lilies meant death. Red carnations were for celebration. White carnations for mourning. Even the way you tied a ribbon, to the left or the right, could carry meaning. The Germans didn't know any of this. To them, a flower was just a flower. But to someone French, someone paying attention, flower arrangements could say things words couldn't. Marguerite began experimenting. When a German captain ordered something cheerful for his office, she sent yellow roses, the flowers of infidelity and betrayal. When an officer requested a bouquet for a funeral, she included white chrysanthemums, which in France are reserved for graves. No one noticed. The Germans accepted whatever she sent. She realized she could embed meaning into arrangements that would be invisible to her German customers, but readable to French eyes. Not a code exactly. Not yet. But the framework for one. The final piece came from her childhood. Her grandmother had taught her the Victorian language of flowers. Tussie-mussies, those small bouquets where every stem carried a specific meaning. Lavender for devotion, rosemary for remembrance, forget-me-nots for true love. Marguerite took that language and built something new. Not sentimental messages, but practical ones. Flower types for categories of information, colors for specifics, quantities for timing, arrangements for locations. She created a dictionary only she could read. And then she waited for someone to notice. Henri Renard came into her shop on a Tuesday in November 1940. He was young, maybe 25, with a thin mustache and paint under his fingernails. He said he was an art student, needed flowers for a still life he was painting, something with interesting shapes. Marguerite sold him a bundle of dried wheat stalks and 3 sunflowers. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, always in the afternoon, always buying small things, carnations, ferns, once a single white orchid. On his 4th visit, he placed a piece of paper on her counter while she was wrapping his purchase. It was a charcoal sketch of her shop, the window, the buckets of flowers, her figure behind the counter. "For you," he said, "as a thank you for your patience with my questions." She looked at the drawing. It was good, better than good. But in the corner, barely visible, he'd sketched something that wasn't in her shop. A single iris. Marguerite went very still. Iris, the flower of the French monarchy, the flower that appeared on resistance pamphlets, the flower that meant France. She looked up at Henri. He was watching her carefully. "I don't have irises in the shop," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but you should." She wrapped his carnations in silence. When she handed them to him, she tucked a small card into the paper. On it she'd written, "Purple irises in the window mean safe to approach. White roses mean danger. Henri read the card, nodded once, put it in his pocket. That night, Marguerite didn't sleep. She sat in her dark apartment and understood that she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had offered her shop as a signal station for the resistance. She had made herself complicit. If Henri were a Gestapo plant, she would be arrested by morning. But the morning came, and no one knocked on her door. Henri returned the following Tuesday with 2 other men, both young, both careful in how they moved. They bought flowers, made small talk, left. The next day, Henri came alone. He ordered a bouquet for his mother, roses and lavender. While Marguerite prepared it, he described his mother's address, the time he'd deliver them, and how long he'd stay. All lies, all information. Marguerite listened and began assembling the bouquet according to her private system. Red, roses for military movements, lavender for the western districts, 7 stems for 7 o'clock. "Your mother will love these," she said, when she handed them over. "I'm sure she will." Henri replied. He never had a mother. The flowers went to a printer in Montparnasse, who saw the arrangement, understood its meaning, and adjusted the distribution schedule for an underground newspaper accordingly. The first message had been sent. The system was active. Marguerite was no longer a shopkeeper. She was infrastructure. By spring 1941, Marguerite's system had expanded into something larger than she'd imagined. Henri brought others, students, workers, a priest from Saint-Paul-Saint-Louis, a librarian from the Bibliothèque Historique. They came singly or in pairs, never the same pattern twice, always buying flowers, always embedding information in their orders. Marguerite learned to read the requests instantly. Roses for my sister's wedding, information about Wehrmacht movements, lilies for my grandmother's grave, Gestapo activity in a specific district, something cheerful for a friend in the hospital. A safe house had been compromised. Stay away. She translated those verbal requests into arrangements. Flowers became nouns. Colors became adjectives. Quantities became time frames. The placement of blooms in a bouquet, which flowers in front, which hidden in back, indicated priority and urgency. A resistance courier would visit the shop later, buy something small, and glance at the arrangements in the window. In 30 seconds, they could read the day's intelligence without a word being spoken. The system was elegant, invisible, and terrifyingly fragile. Marguerite knew that one mistake would destroy everything. If she put the wrong color flower in an arrangement, if a German officer noticed that certain customers always bought specific combinations, if someone photographed her window and analyzed the patterns. She developed rituals to protect against errors. Every evening she wrote out the day's orders in her regular ledger, the public record that German inspectors could examine. But she also kept a second notebook, hidden, where she recorded the true meanings of each arrangement. That notebook was her death warrant if discovered. In June, a new officer was assigned to her neighborhood, Oberleutnant Franz Kessler, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who seemed to notice everything. He began stopping at her shop twice a week, always with questions. "These tulips, why do you place them in the window?" "They catch the light, sir. Customers see them from the street." "And these, the white carnations, you always keep them in the cooler." "They wilt faster than other flowers. The cooler preserves them." Kessler would nod, make notes in a small leather book, and leave. Marguerite's hands would shake for an hour afterward. She wanted to stop, wanted to return to simply selling flowers, to being invisible, to surviving. But Henri kept coming, and the information kept flowing. She learned that 17 people had escaped arrest because of her signals, that a Gestapo raid had been avoided. Those weapons had been moved before a warehouse search. People were living because of her flowers. So she continued, even as the fear became constant, a weight in her chest that never lifted. The mistake came in September 1941. An older woman entered the shop, gray-haired, elegant, expensive coat. She ordered flowers for a dinner party. Something sophisticated, roses, perhaps, and those lovely purple irises in your window. Marguerite froze. Purple irises in the window meant safe to approach, a signal to resistance members that the shop wasn't under surveillance. They were never sold. They were only for display. "I'm sorry, madam," Marguerite said carefully. "Those irises aren't for sale. They're part of the window arrangement." The woman's face hardened. "I'll pay double." "They're not triple, then?" Marguerite tried to read the woman. Was she simply a difficult customer? Or was this a test? Kessler had been in the shop that morning, lingering too long, asking about her inventory. "I can order fresh irises for you," Marguerite said. "They'll arrive on Thursday." "Unacceptable. I want those flowers." The woman's voice had risen. Other customers were looking over. Marguerite felt the situation spiraling. If she refused too strongly, she'd create a scene. If she sold the irises, she'd erase the day's signal. Henri was supposed to come at 2:00. She made her decision. "Of course, madam. Give me a moment to prepare them." She went to the window and removed the irises, wrapped them in paper. The woman paid and left, satisfied. Marguerite immediately placed white roses in the window, the danger signal. But it was too late. At 2:15, she saw Henri through the window, walking toward the shop. He hadn't seen the signal change. He was already at the door. She met him before he could enter. "I'm closing early," she said too loudly. "Please come back tomorrow." Henri looked at her, confused. Then his eyes went to the window, to the white roses. His expression changed. "Of course," he said. "Tomorrow." He turned and walked away, not quickly, not slowly. Ordinary. 3 minutes later, 2 Gestapo cars pulled up outside her shop. Oberleutnant Kessler got out. With him were 4 other men, all in civilian clothes. They entered the shop. Kessler closed the door behind them and locked it. "Madame Devereaux," he said, "we need to discuss your customers." For the next 6 hours, they questioned her. Who bought what flowers? How often certain people visited? Why did she display arrangements in specific ways? Kessler showed her photographs. Henri, the priest, the librarian, others she'd seen but never known by name. "Do you recognize these men?" "Some are customers, yes." "What did they buy?" She recited orders from memory, exactly as they appeared in her ledger. Kessler kept circling back to the same question. Why certain flowers in the window? Why certain arrangements? Marguerite explained it as merchandising, as aesthetics, as random choice. She never wavered, never contradicted herself. At midnight, they let her go. No arrest, no charges, just a warning. "We'll be watching more carefully." The next morning, Henri didn't come. Neither did anyone else from the network. The flower shop returned to being just a flower shop. For 3 weeks, Marguerite waited for the Gestapo to return. She sold flowers to German officers and French collaborators. She kept her ledgers perfect. She arranged bouquets without hidden meanings. Every night, she burned her second notebook page by page in her kitchen sink, watching the flower codes dissolve into ash. Henri never came back. Neither did the priest, nor the librarian, nor any of the others. She assumed they'd been arrested, assumed the network had been rolled up, everyone taken to Friends Prison or Avenue Foch for interrogation. She waited for someone to break, to give her name, to connect her shop to resistance operations. But the arrest never came. In October, a different customer appeared, a middle-aged man with a scarred hand who bought a single white carnation. As Marguerite wrapped it, he said quietly, "Henri says thank you for the warning." Then he was gone. Slowly, carefully, others began returning. Not the same faces as before. Those people had been evacuated, moved to different networks in different parts of the city. But new couriers, new members of the resistance, people who'd been briefed on her system. The flowers started carrying messages again. But Marguerite changed how she worked. She varied the signals more. Never used the same combination twice in 1 week. Reduced the number of people who knew the full code. And she added a new protocol. If white roses appeared in her window, everyone was to stay away for 48 hours. No exceptions. The Gestapo never questioned her again. Kessler continued his patrols, but he stopped visiting her shop. Either he'd concluded she was harmless, or he was watching from a distance. She never knew which. In November 1942, the Germans expanded their occupation to the southern zone. More officers flooded into Paris, more customers in her shop, more opportunities to pass information. Marguerite's system kept operating through the winter, through 1943, through the increasing brutality of the occupation. She witnessed arrests on her street, saw deportation convoys heading east, heard the stories of torture in Avenue Foch. She kept arranging flowers. In June 1944, she heard about the invasion at Normandy from a German captain who stormed into her shop and canceled his standing order. "We're being reassigned," he said. That afternoon, every arrangement in her window bloomed with purple irises. After liberation, Marguerite Devereaux returned to being anonymous. She testified once, briefly, to a military tribunal documenting resistance activities in Paris. She described her system to 2 officers who took notes and thanked her for her service. Her name appeared in no histories. No medals were awarded. No streets were named after her. The files from the tribunal were classified and eventually lost. The handful of resistance members who knew about her flower code either died during the war or moved on with their lives. Henri survived and became a teacher in Marseille. They never spoke again. Marguerite continued running her shop on Rue Saint-Antoine until 1962, when arthritis made it impossible to work with her hands. She sold the business to a young couple from Alsace and retired to a small apartment in the 12th arrondissement. She died in 1968 at age 69 of pneumonia. Her obituary in Le Parisien was 3 sentences long. It mentioned that she'd been a florist and a widow. Nothing else. The only evidence that her system existed comes from scattered sources. A paragraph in Henri's unpublished memoir, a footnote in a 1970s academic study of resistance communication methods, and testimony from a Gestapo clerk who was interviewed in 1983 and mentioned that they'd suspected a florist in the 4th arrondissement, but could never prove anything. Historians estimate that Marguerite's flowers facilitated approximately 200 information transfers between 1940 and 1944. Those signals led to successful weapons movements, safehouse warnings, and coordinated timing for underground newspaper distribution. Dozens of people evaded capture because of the intelligence passed through her shop. But the precise impact can't be measured. The messages were never written down. The operations they enabled were designed to leave no traces. That was the point. In 2003, a researcher going through wartime Gestapo files found Marguerite's name in a surveillance report from September 1941. The report noted unusual customer patterns at her shop, but recommended no action. Kessler had written in the margin, "Insufficient evidence. Maintain observation." He'd been watching. He'd suspected. But he never understood that the evidence he needed was in plain sight, in the flowers themselves, in their colors and quantities and arrangements, in a language he couldn't read because he'd never learned to see flowers as anything but decorations. The shop on Rue Saint-Antoine still exists. It's a phone store now. No plaque marks what happened there. No tourists stop to take pictures. The flowers Marguerite arranged are gone. The messages they carried are gone. But somewhere in the city's memory, beneath the surface of official history, is the quiet fact that resistance wasn't always about guns or bombs or dramatic acts of sabotage. Sometimes it was about knowing which flowers to put in a window on a Tuesday afternoon, and having the courage to do it anyway.